South Africans have more faith in policy than political leaders. This is one of the findings of the South African Reconciliation Barometer from the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation, released for this year. It comes a year after the institution of the Government of National Unity. I'm joined now by Kate Lefko-Everett. She is a senior consultant at the South African Reconciliation Barometer. Kate, a very warm good day to you. So just released the Reconciliation Barometer. Let us first start with what exactly this is. I understand it's a long-running public survey. If you can just tell us more about the barometer itself.
Sure, thank you so much. The Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, we are a nonprofit organization based in Cape Town and have been conducting the South African Reconciliation Barometer survey since 2003. So this is a nationally representative survey. We interviewed 2006 South Africans in July and August of this year, and it really gives a picture of the state of reconciliation and democracy. We have over 20 years of data on the situation in the country.
So one of the key findings I see is that South Africans, the electorate seems to be moving away from, I suppose, support for political parties or political personalities, and rather are starting to focus on policies. Explain to us in a nutshell what your dimensions were, the questions asked of the sample group of South Africans, and also what this indicates a year into a new government formed after last year's elections, when, of course, the ANC lost its outright majority.
Yes, that's correct. The last survey that we conducted was 2023, and at the time we found very low levels of trust in national leadership, low levels of confidence in public institutions. And this year in 2025, as you mentioned, we conducted the survey about 1 year after the GNU was established. Unfortunately, there's been very little change in those low levels of public confidence. We still see distrust, many South Africans believing that political leadership does not care about the views of ordinary people, low levels of confidence in institutions, including local government, with the upcoming 2026-27 election. However, where we do see some interesting variation, which has come as there are multiple political parties now represented with the GNU, is that there is variation in views on some of the key policy touchpoints and legislative issues that the GNU has been grappling with this year. So we see moderate approval, for example, for national health insurance, for the national dialogue process, and even the Expropriation Act, which has been controversial, but that really allows for decision makers and the ordinary public to have empirical data on what the public sees as the key policy priorities going forward.
So if I understand correctly, under the issue of social cohesion, there appears to be from the survey that South Africans have a strong sense of national identity, but that trust remains a problem. What have you found?
It's true. In all of our years of doing this survey, we do find very high levels of national identity, and many people in the country really see being South African as core to how they view themselves. However, our feeling is that is not sufficient any longer. We see, as you mentioned, very high levels of distrust. People really only trust those who are closest to them, like their neighbors and their family members, and are receding a bit into those social circles. And at the same time, we see higher levels of affinity and association with, for example, identity based on language groups rather than a shared common national identity. So it's an area of potential work going forward.
The sentiment around the period, the 31 years after democracy, in terms of where we've come as a country, is there a sense from South Africans in terms of how well South Africa has fared in regards to the post-apartheid era?
We've definitely seen some areas of improvement, but when we look at this year's survey results, we do see a lot of pervasive pessimism as well. Most people don't feel that their lived reality has improved substantially since 1994, and the area of least improvement is generally always been in the survey, the gap between rich and poor. And most South Africans also believe that gap and that income inequality is the biggest barrier to future reconciliation going forward.
Kate, we know that the release of this survey, of this barometer, also comes about a year or so before South Africa goes to the polls in the local government elections. What can politicians, administrators, government take and glean from this report? How, in other words, how do they implement clearly what a sample of South Africans want?
Well, based on this year's findings, I think it's important to, again, think back on the situation that we were in the lead up to the 2024 elections, which was a national mood of anxiety and a lot of anticipation of instability. And people were unsure about what might happen after the elections. We wouldn't want to see a return to that situation, especially around the actual violence that occurred in some places and with the upcoming elections being about local government. So I think it's really an opportunity. We've seen kind of that there's a bit of a wait and see attitude from the public coming through from the survey findings. Now is the time for the GNU to really focus on how they can practically work together and co-govern.